Chapter 901. Pei Huan screamed and covered her body as she ran into the changing room. While Pei Huan was changing, Pei Chi glared at Old Kansas. What's going on? Old Kan took out a cigarette from the bedside table and lit it. He smiled and said, "That's all. I was tempted by her." "Have you never seen a woman?" Pei Chi sneered. "What about Suimo? What about you? Can you promise that you won't think about Suimo if you get together with Pei Huan? Can I just think about her occasionally?" Old Kan cared a lot about Pei Chi. He took a deep drag on his cigarette and continued, "You won't object to this, will you? You think about Suimo?" Pei Chi pretended to be dumb and stared at Old Kansas. She was still not used to Old Kan's beardless appearance. It was as if he wasn't wearing any clothes. However, Old Kan was indeed naked. He was only wearing a layer of Xiong's fur. Old Kan looked at her reproachfully and let out a long sigh. "Bullshit. I'm talking about Pei Huan." Pei Chi smiled. "You don't need my permission." She paused for a while and said, "As long as you can protect yourself, nothing will happen between you and Suimo." Old Kan let out a long sigh. "Of course." Pei Chi didn't say anything else, while Pei Huan stood at the bathroom door with tears in her eyes. Even though Chi sounded fierce, she still cared about her and cared about her in her heart. Pei Chi looked up and rolled her eyes when she saw Pei Huan's expression. Pei Huan was really promising. She was touched by the slightest gesture. What happened to the courage she used to drug Lin Jinrong and sleep with him? Pei Huan sounded like a pitiful stray animal. "Chi, you've forgiven me. I'm really happy that you care about me." Pei Chi couldn't take it anymore. "Pei Huan, do you think you're filming?" Pei Huan looked at Lao Kan, who was standing at the side. His mouth was covered with a thin layer of Xiong hair. He swallowed hard and said the truth. "Actually, I want to shoot bed scenes more." Pei Chi couldn't take it anymore. She dragged her luggage in and dragged it all the way to the attached lounge. She shouted towards the outside, "I'm going to get jet-lagged. If you two are going to do something, keep it down. Chi, have a good sleep." Pei Huan was especially enthusiastic. She was just short of making the bed. Pei Chi was speechless and closed the door. When she was lying on the bed, she heard some kind of secret sound coming from the other side. She knew that Pei Huan had gone to film again, a bed scene. As he listened, he couldn't help but think of Tang Yu. Her phone was by her pillow. She couldn't help but pick it up and send a message to Tang Yu. "Are you asleep?" There was no reply from the other side for a long time. Just as she was about to fall asleep, Tang Yu sent her a message. "I'm just about to sleep. Good night, Chi." She looked at it, and her heart softened. Lying on the bed, listening to Pei Huan's voice that sounded like a wild cat, she couldn't help but think of Tang Xian. She pursed her lips and there was a complicated look in her eyes. Tang Xian, this silly child. She still regretted it in her heart. If it wasn't for her, perhaps Tang Xian would still be living peacefully as her little princess. Although she didn't have much freedom and was forced to learn many things by Zhaoku, she was still happy. Because she had a father, a mother, and a brother who loved her dearly. Everything had been ruined by him. Chapter 902. Lin Yun's twins flashed across Pei Chi's mind, and she thought of Xiaoxin. Her and Tang Yu's child must be so cute, right? Tang Yu said that the child would not be named Tang Tang because it was too unpleasant. She would be called Tang Share. No matter what her name was, it was fine as long as she was alive. After going through so much, Pei Chi had a new understanding of life. Being alive was more important than anything else. Her only regret was Tang Xian. She was not in a position to hate Tang Yu. If she did, she would be too unreasonable. However, she was very confused and didn't dare to think about the future. In a daze, he fell asleep. In the ward, Pei Huan was pestering Old Kan like a little demon. She borrowed a nurse's uniform from somewhere and tried to seduce him. Old Kan couldn't take it anymore. Pei Huan put her hand on his chest and pretended to be very surprised. "Mr. Kan, your heart is beating so fast. Are you sick? Let me check for you." Her little hand was like a nimble snake, but Old Kan couldn't stand it. He grabbed her mischievous little hand and said gruffly, "That girl is inside." "What? You don't dare to do it anymore?" Pei Huan pulled a handful of Old Can's xiong hair. Old Can's breathing became heavier, and he looked at the little demon on him with fiery eyes. He patted her twice, indescribable parts, with his big palm. I'll let you know if I dare to do it or not. As he said that, he picked up Pei Huan and carried her to the wall that was separated from Pei Chi-Chi's. Pei Huan breathed in excitedly. She liked Old Can's style. She leaned against the wall and looked at Old Can with a provocative look. I'm afraid you can't move. Old Can was the type of person who wouldn't talk nonsense if he could move. So, he started to move. In the end, Pei Huan was on her last breath, and he almost knocked her into Pei Chi-Chi's room. After the storm subsided, she lay on Old Can's chest and tugged at his hair. Old Can you really let go of me? She asked softly. Old Can you really let go of me? I can't, Old Can said gruffly. What else can I do? Pei Huan's small hands plucked the xiong's fur strand by strand, and her voice was fierce. Let me tell you, if you dare to betray me, I will pluck out all your fur. Old Can's eyes blazed again. Let's pull out the lower part first. As he spoke, he pulled her little hand down. How shameless. No matter how fierce Pei Huan was, she was just a little girl. At this moment, she was tortured by Old Can to the point where she wished she was dead. As she fell into a deep sleep, she vaguely thought that Old Can could be discharged from the hospital. Early in the morning, a ray of sunlight shone into the narrow lounge. Pei Chi-Chi endured the discomfort of her eyelashes and opened her eyes. She turned over and let out a long sigh. Pei Huan had been meowing like a kitten the whole night last night. She really didn't know why Old Can still needed to be hospitalized if he had such good stamina. After washing her face and brushing her teeth, Old Can lay down on the bed while Pei Huan slept soundly on top of him. Her little hands were hooked around Old Can's neck, as though she was afraid that Old Can would leave her behind. Pei Chi-Chi watched for a while before walking into the small kitchen to make breakfast for her master's wife, and herself. The aroma of the food must have woken Pei Huan up as she ran over in her semi-transparent pajamas. At that moment, Pei Chi-Chi was worried about Old Can's kidney. Chapter 903. Pei Huan looked at the millet porridge on the table, as well as a couple of side dishes, and kissed Pei Chi-Chi sweetly. Pei Chi-Chi covered her face, and her expression was a little complicated. She felt that Pei Huan's mental state was a little abnormal. Old Can sat down calmly and looked at Pei Huan. You are 22 years old now, not 12. Do you think your intelligence is normal? Pei Huan rolled her eyes at Old Can, thinking that she was going to kill him tonight. On the surface, it seemed that she was the one who was insatiable, but in fact, it was this old man who had a lot of needs. She only wanted it once or twice, but this old man came 4 or 5 times, and he wouldn't stop for an hour. Besides, his muscles were strong, and she couldn't take it. Seeing that she didn't talk back, Old Can was very satisfied. Pei Chi-Chi looked at them coldly, thinking that Pei Huan and Old Can were a match made in heaven. Pei Huan ate Chinese food, and when she was half full, she touched her stomach. I'm starving. She looked at Pei Chi-Chi and complained, Your master doesn't know how to be tender to women. My back hurts so much. Pei Chi-Chi looked at Old Can silently and didn't say anything. Old Can's face turned red, and he didn't say anything. He wanted to strangle Pei Huan to death. Pei Huan continued, Chi-Chi, I'll help Old Can get discharged in a while. She paused. The bed here is so uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Old Can still cared. The bed was uncomfortable, but he still made her comfortable. Pei Huan smiled sweetly. I'll move to your place from today onwards. Old Can was shocked. Pei Chi-Chi looked up at the two of them. Pei Huan's face darkened. Is there anything wrong with me moving to your place? You said that you would buy a house in B City and marry me. I said I would buy a house, but the renovation will take a year. Old Can said helplessly. He was still a little hesitant to live with her now, because she was too noisy. Pei Huan was unhappy and stood up immediately. Can Mingzhu, if you don't want to be responsible, then don't occupy my land every day. It's not like I, Pei Huan, can't find a man to marry me. Is there a need to cling to you like this? Old Can closed his eyes and felt a little helpless. What could he say to an unreasonable little girl? It's not that I don't want to be responsible, but are you sure you want to live in an apartment with me? He knew that with Pei Huan's financial ability, she must be living in a villa. Now that she was staying with him in an apartment, and it was rented, it was a little unfair for her. Laucan was such a man. He wanted to treat his woman well. He was willing to give her everything he could. As for what he couldn't, he would work hard. That was it. When Pei Huan heard this, she became happy again. She nestled in Old Can's arms in her translucent pajamas. She drew circles with her little hands and said in a very obedient voice, "As long as I can be with you, anywhere is fine. Besides, your place is not bad." Pei Chi looked at this scene. She wasn't worried about Old Can's kidney anymore. She was worried about her own eyes. When Pei Huan and Lin Jinrong were husband and wife, they weren't so lovey-dovey. This was probably the difference between being loved and not being loved. In the past, she had always felt that Pei Huan wasn't worthy of someone like Old Kansas. But now, she felt that it was good for them to be together. Chapter 904. Old Can would agree to anything now, even plucking the moon from the sky for her. Pei Huan looked at Pei Chi. "Can Mingzhu, when I move in tomorrow, let your little disciple cook for us every day, okay?" Old Can gasped. Pei Huan really dared to say that. He didn't even dare to order his little disciple around. She, on the other hand, was asking to go to heaven once she gained power. Old Can lowered his head and didn't say a word, letting the two sisters tear each other apart. Pei Chi looked at Pei Huan and then at Old Kansas. She sneered. "Pei Huan, don't you always like to be the younger sister? Sister Can, you and Pei Huan can call me sister from now on." The expression on Old Can's face was indescribable. Pei Huan was also stunned for a moment, and then Old Can glared at her. She felt wronged and didn't say a word. Pei Chi's mood improved immediately. "When are you getting married?" Pei Huan was still reserved about this kind of thing and looked at Old Can eagerly. Old Can put his arm around Pei Huan's shoulder and smiled. "It has to be renovated. Let's do it in a year." Pei Chi glanced at Pei Huan and said slowly, "I thought Pei Huan couldn't wait and prepared the house first." Surprisingly, Old Can wasn't angry. Pei Huan was stunned and then bit her lip. "Pei Chi, you're so bad." Pei Chi looked at her. "Why? Don't you think so?" Pei Huan cried out, "Even if I think so, you're not allowed to say it out loud." After she said that, Pei Chi didn't say anything else and just stared at Pei Huan. Pei Huan asked cautiously, "Chi, are you unhappy?" If it weren't for her new man, Old Can, she would have hugged Pei Chi's leg and cried, begging her to forgive her. Pei Chi was stunned for a while before she smiled. "No." She looked at Pei Huan with a rare gentleness. "Pei Huan, you're much cuter than before." Pei Huan was so cold that she wanted to cry. She bit her lip, not knowing what to do. Then, she pinched Old Kansas. "Why didn't you speak up for me?" Laucan stared at her as if she was a good-for-nothing. He coughed lightly and said, Chi, let her go on account of her stupidity. I'll fix her later." These words made Pei Huan unhappy again. When she was unhappy, she went to pinch Old Kansas. Fortunately, Old Can was thick-skinned and could not cause any trouble for a while. In the end, Old Can gave Pei Huan a look, and he calmed down. She blushed a little, so she changed her clothes and went to the doctor to get a discharge certificate, leaving Pei Chi and Laucan alone. Old Can stretched his body and began to pack his things. As he did so, he said, "I'll have to do this. Pei Huan might be a woman, but she only has the basic functions of a woman. She's nothing else." "But you seem to enjoy the basic functions of Pei Huan." Pei Chi leaned at the side and chuckled. She looked at Old Can teasingly. Perhaps it was because he had shaved his beard. His emotions were more obvious. At least for now, he seemed to be happy. He had never been so happy before. Pei Chi recalled Old Can's disappointment after seeing Su Mo, which was completely different from his high spirits. Her voice was low and gentle. "Master, have you thought it through? Is that person Pei Huan? Are you sure that the person you want to spend the rest of your life with is Pei Huan?" Chapter 905. Old Can said slowly, Chi, maybe my feelings for Pei Huan came from her reliance on me. However, when she knelt in front of Fifth Master O that day, and said that she was willing to stay and let me go. I felt that I couldn't let her go. At that time, I secretly thought that if I could escape this disaster, I would be with her. Pei-Chi-Chi was a little moved. Old Can's feelings for her were real. Old Can continued, maybe she's not very good. Or maybe she used to be terrible. But Chi-Chi, don't think too highly of me. My life in the past was not much better than Pei Huan's. Pei Huan looked at Old Can for a long time before she smiled softly. As long as you're happy. Really, Pei Huan is quite cute now. Old Can stretched out his hand. His intention was very obvious. He wanted a hug. Pei-Chi-Chi smiled and went forward to hug Old Kansas. Her voice was a little hoarse. You must be happy. Old Can grunted. You too. He did not ask about Pei-Chi-Chi and Tang Yu, because if she wanted to talk about it, she would. However, she seemed to be in a good mood. Pei-Chi-Chi and Old Can smiled similarly. Old Can patted her hard with his big palm. I'll take you to a sightseeing trip tomorrow. Aren't we going to take a photo of a rich lady? Pei-Chi-Chi looked up at Old Kansas. Old Can's face darkened. He looked at her as if he wanted to eat her up. Pei-Chi-Chi smiled. You can bring Pei Huan with you. Old Can's face darkened even more. It was dark and gloomy. Pei-Chi-Chi was very happy and hummed a song. On the other side, Pei Huan went to settle the discharge formalities for Old Kansas. She had just paid the bill when she turned around and bumped into the other party's shoulder. Pei Huan suddenly looked up and saw Lin Jinrong. He seemed to be here for a follow-up visit. Behind him was his beautiful female secretary, who looked docile. Pei Huan just looked at him. Her eyes were a little hot, and her throat seemed to be blocked by something. She could not speak. She blinked and felt like a lifetime had passed. Lin Jinrong put his hand on her shoulder and straightened her up. After that, he looked at the list in her hand and asked calmly, Hospitalized? Pei Huan blinked again and said softly, No, it's... My boyfriend is in the hospital and will be leaving soon. Lin Jinrong paused for a moment, then nodded. Boyfriend? Not bad. For a moment, Pei Huan didn't know what to say. She nodded in a daze. He's pretty good. He treats me very well. While they were talking, Lao Can came over. He was dressed in black casual clothes and looked tall and mighty. Although his face was slightly inferior to that of Tang Yu and Lin Jinrong, he was overall not bad. While Lin Jinrong was sizing up Old Can was also sizing him up. What a character! But wasn't he chasing after Pei-Chi-Chi? He lowered his head and glanced at Pei Huan. The meaning in his gaze made Pei Huan feel very uncomfortable. She pulled Lao Can aside and waved goodbye to Lin Jinrong. Lin Jinrong looked at their backs and recalled the look in Pei Huan's eyes. There was only a little surprise in his eyes, but not much nostalgia. He pursed his lips and looked a little envious. The secretary behind him said softly, CEO, there's a meeting in a while. Lin Jinrong stood there and watched for a while before sighing softly. Let's go. He said that he was going to leave, but the person walking over made him stop in his tracks. That was Pei-Chi-Chi. Chapter 906. Pei-Chi-Chi had come to look for Old Can and Pei Huan, but they had left in another elevator. She hadn't expected to run into Lin Jinrong here and was stunned. Jinrong? She slowed down and her gaze fell on his face. Lin Jinrong raised his hand and gestured for the secretary to go downstairs and wait for him in the car. The secretary looked at his straight eyes and didn't dare to rush him, so she quickly left. Lin Jinrong put one hand in his pocket and looked at Pei-Chi-Chi. His voice was a little indifferent. Why are you here? Are you with Pei Huan? Pei-Chi-Chi looked at him and couldn't look away. After a long time, she nodded and said, Yes, that's my mentor. Lin Jinrong then remembered that the man just now was the bearded man. He didn't seem to recognize him after he shaved. Pei-Chi-Chi bit her lip and said, They're together. Lin Jinrong smiled slightly and said in a good mood, Then I wish them well. He looked straight at her and was speechless. Pei-Chi-Chi was the same. After a long time, he sighed and said, But Pei-Chi-Chi, if you and Tang Yu are together, I won't wish you well. In fact, he knew that she and Tang Yu had gone to America for 3 days. And now that he said so, she didn't deny it. The balance in her heart was already leaning towards Tang Yu. Moreover, she still had to be careful. Although Lin Jinrong said that he didn't fight for it, he didn't completely give up. He had never stopped liking her. Pei Qiqi said in a low voice, Jinrong, don't be like this, okay? Pei Qiqi, are you trying to tell me that you only want to be friends with me? There was an indescribable sense of loss in his voice as he looked at her quietly. Pei Qiqi pursed her lips and was a little lost. Jinrong, I won't force you. It's because I like you. Lin Jinrong smiled slightly, but it was a little bitter. When he brushed past her, his voice was very low. Pei Qiqi, I won't give up. By the time she came back to her senses, he had already walked past her. It was just like how some people were destined to be missed and could only be missed. Because if you want to have something else, you have to give up what doesn't belong to you. Jinrong was like that to her. Pei Qiqi turned around and looked at his back. At that time, she was sad. She wanted to tell him to give up, but that would only humiliate his pride. Wouldn't it be selfish of her to not respond and pretend that nothing had happened? When Pei Qiqi returned to the ward, Pei Huan and Lao Can were still playing. This time, it was not Pei Huan who was playing, but our Lao Kansas Old Can's heart was in a mess, and he kept tormenting Pei Huan. Seeing that Pei Qiqi had returned, Pei Huan looked as if she had seen her savior. Her voice was as soft as a little lamb. Qiqi, look, Old Can is bullying me. Pei Qiqi looked at her slowly and said, when he bullied you at night, you didn't ask me for help. Pei Huan felt that Pei Qiqi was so dirty. Her face turned red and her voice became even softer. You don't need help with that at night. Seeing her like that, Old Can didn't argue anymore. He reached out and picked up his luggage. Okay, let's go. Pei Huan immediately followed Old Can like a little wolf dog. Chapter 907. Pei Qiqi shook her head helplessly. Pei Huan was still looking at her eagerly, looking like a little wolf puppy. Pei Qiqi had never seen such a cuteness before. She followed behind, smiling and shaking her head. Pei Huan and Old Can really didn't expect it. But she saw that Pei Huan was like a moth flying into a flame, just like the last time she met Jinrong. The difference was that this time, Pei Huan was no longer wishful thinking. They took the elevator downstairs. Pei Huan's agent, Xiaomei, was already waiting downstairs in the car. The super-long limousine was black and shiny. Pei Qiqi looked at it and thought it was worth more than 4 million yuan. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Old Kansas. Do you feel like you're being raised by a bitch? Old Can glanced at her and said nothing. He put the luggage in the trunk and took over from Xiaomei. I'll drive. Xiaomei was quite smart. Although Mr. Can was not a celebrity, he was an upright man who had saved Pei Huan and was very talented. If he really cared about Pei Huan, she would be relieved. Xiaomei was only 28 years old, but in front of the 22-year-old mentally handicapped Pei Huan, she felt that she had become a mother in advance. She nodded and got out of the car to sit in the back seat. As soon as Old Can was about to get in the car, more than 10 reporters came out of nowhere and took pictures of Pei Huan and Old Can, who were sitting in the front passenger seat. Miss Pei, I heard that this gentleman has a close relationship with you. Can you explain it to your fans? Xiaomei was about to scold them when Pei Huan said sweetly, I'm dating Mr. Can Mingzhu with the premise of marriage. Xiaomei closed her eyes. What about Pei Huan's future? It was okay to fall in love, but it had to be done secretly. How could there be a rich girl like her? Old Can held the steering wheel and snorted, but he was satisfied. Pei Huan leaned over and kissed his chin. Darling, isn't that right? Old Can smiled and started the car. He looked quite manly and gave Pei Huan a lot of face. The reporters were stunned. Can Mingzhu? Wasn't that the photography genius, Old Can? I can't recognize him after he shaved. He looked much younger, however. He was indeed much younger than Pei Huan. He would have something to write about when he went back. Pei Huan was satisfied. He sat up straight and looked at Old Kansas. Will you be angry? I'm an old cow that eats young grass. What's there to be angry about? Old Can focused on the road. But Pei Huan, have you thought it through? This will affect your career. What do I need this career for? Pei Huan's voice was very soft, but everyone in the car heard it. All I want in my heart is a man who loves me. Glory, splendor, wealth, and rank are just fleeting clouds. Lao Can was so touched that he was in a mess. Pei Chi wanted to vomit blood. When did Pei Huan have such awareness? If the Pei group couldn't bring her hundreds of millions of yuan every year, would she still be able to speak so freely? However, Old Can was a straight man. He felt that Pei Huan's greatest asset came from his wealth. For a moment, he was touched and satisfied. Little May rolled her eyes outside the window and yawned. Pei Huan was moved by herself and Old Can, but she felt that the two people in the back seat were not in the right mood. After analyzing for a long time, she stomped her feet. What he said is true. No one doubts it. Pei Chi said with certainty, "We all believe you." Chapter 908. Pei Chi asked Pei Huan seriously, "So what?" "I'm angry," Pei Huan said pitifully. Pei Chi and Xiaomei couldn't help laughing. Old Can patted Pei Huan's head and said, "Silly?" Pei Huan shouted in her heart, "I'm not silly. I've trapped you, Old Can." As she thought about it, she softened and turned into a little wolf dog. She hugged Old Can's arm and said softly, "I'm your silly." Pei Chi and Xiaomei looked at each other and giggled. Pei Huan snorted and said, "I'm your silly." She was right. Back at the condominium, Pei Huan went straight to Old Can's bed. She sprayed her perfume all over his bed like a wolf dog taking a piss. Pei Chi went to cook and Pei Huan dragged Old Can into the room. Old Can looked at the door and frowned. "It's broad daylight." Pei Huan sat on him and said, "Let's celebrate." Old Can couldn't take it anymore. Looking at the cute wolf dog, he reached out and pressed the button on the side. The curtains slowly closed. Today, Pei Huan was playing the role of a wolf dog. Old Can was licked from top to bottom, inside and out. He lay on the bed, panting, and a little excited. He pulled the wolf dog into his arms. His heart was incredibly soft. He touched her little mouth and said in a low voice, "Don't you think it's dirty?" Pei Huan's little hand played with his xiong fur. "As long as you don't have other women, it's not dirty." Old Can didn't say anything and just touched her. Pei Chi finished cooking and looked at Xiaomei. Xiaomei looked innocent and said, "She wasn't like this before." She was doing it in broad daylight, and her voice wasn't soft at all in the past. Pei Huan didn't have such an interest in a bed scene where her partner was a little fresh meat. Therefore, when Old Can and Pei Huan came out, Xiaomei kept staring at a certain part of Old Can, trying to see if there was anything special about him. Old Can hugged himself and glared at Pei Huan. Pei Huan howled again. Even when she was eating, she had to stay close to him. She hugged her arms and spoke in a delicate voice. That person did not seem like Pei Huan at all. Pei Chi felt embarrassed for her, but it was fine as long as she enjoyed it. After messing around for a day, it could be considered as a celebration for them. That night, Little May left first. The couple that had just come out of the pot returned to their room to make out. Old Can's heart ached for his kidneys again. Old Can said, "I have 3 kidneys, and one of them is specially used to deal with this little demon." Pei Chi accepted her fate and washed the dishes. She put on an apron, and the phone in the bag vibrated a few times. She wiped her hands and took a look. It was a call from Tangxi. Her heart softened, and she picked up the call. However, she didn't say anything, waiting for the person on the other side to speak first. Tang Yu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in his office. Under the glass, he could see the prosperity of B City. He stood at a high place and looked at the dark night. His heart softened because the person on the other side of the phone was Pei Chi. "Have you eaten?" His voice was so gentle that it brushed against her heart like a feather. Pei Chi replied. Then, she felt that it was too soft, as if Pei Huan was acting coquettishly to Old Kansas. She quickly cleared her throat and said, "Yes, I have." Tang Yu heard the awkwardness in her words and smiled silently. "Chi, no one will laugh at you for caring about me." Pei Chi pouted. "You are obviously laughing at me now. Is that an admission?" There was a hint of a smile in his voice. Chapter 909. Tang Yu held the phone and looked at the night in front of him. He sighed slightly. "Chi, I haven't eaten yet." He paused and said in a hoarse voice, "And, Chi, I miss you." Pei Chi froze and didn't say anything for a long time. Her breathing was also shallow, and all her attention was on Tang Yu over there. Tang Yu smiled and continued, "Chi-Chi, can I come over?" She took a deep breath and said in a soft voice, "Is Pei Huan here?" There was a hint of warmth in Tang Yu's voice. "Are you going to be a third wheel there?" Pei Chi-Chi looked down at the dishes that had just been washed and said in a low voice, "I'm still a servant." She paused for a moment and suddenly smiled. "When I was with old Can, I helped him buy t-shirts." Tang Yu also relaxed his breathing. In such a night, listening to her talk about the time when they were separated, even the air in the night and the cold building became sweet. However, he still felt sorry for her. His Chi-Chi had helped her master buy t-shirts in order to survive. He had only ordered her once before. His voice was very soft. "Chi-Chi, it was hard at that time, wasn't it?" She didn't say anything, but he knew. At that time, he didn't feel good either. He was careful with her. "It was okay." Her voice was gloomy, and then she suddenly said, "Tang Yu, do you want to eat chicken noodles?" He didn't speak for a long time, and so did she. She held her breath and waited for him to speak. After a long time, he finally said, "I'll drive the car near your apartment and wait for you at the intersection." After she hung up the phone, she began to prepare a bowl of chicken noodles and packed it up. When she was changing her shoes outside, she heard Pei Huan's screams of various decibels. Pei Chi-Chi shook her head with a smile and walked out to close the door. She walked downstairs and saw a black sports car parked on the side of the road. The window was rolled down, and it was Tang Yu's face. But she noticed that it wasn't one of the cars he had driven. Tang Yu's gaze was deep as he looked at her. In the darkness of the night, Pei Chi-Chi couldn't help but tremble. She stopped and looked into his eyes. She stood there in a daze for a moment, then suddenly ran toward him. When she reached the car, she slowed her steps and walked slowly toward it. Standing in front of his car window, she bent down slightly and said softly, "Is it okay? What does it matter?" His gaze fell on her little face as he unbuckled the seatbelt and opened the car door. She thought he was going to get out of the car, but that wasn't the case. One of his hands reached out and held onto her waist. He pulled her into the car with her back facing him. "Noodles?" She screamed. She was afraid of spilling the noodles, so she focused all her attention on the noodles. Tang Yu's large palm moved to her slender waist. He closed the car door with one hand, and the window closed slowly. Inside the car, it was dark. Coupled with the smell of the man and woman, it felt extremely cramped. Moreover, he was behind her, so she couldn't see him. She could only feel his thin lips on her neck, and his breath was hot and tempting. She hugged her trembling body with her empty hand and bit down on her lips, trying her best to avoid his kiss. But how could she avoid it? Instead, he found it even more interesting. Chapter 9:10. As for her, she was still worried about the pitiful noodles. She tilted her face up slightly and avoided his kiss. Her voice changed slightly due to some kind of joy. "Tang Yu, don't you want to eat noodles?" Tang Yu hooked one arm around her waist, and the other reached over to bring the noodles to the control panel. His large palm lifted her up and changed the direction so that she was sitting face to face in his arms. She was wearing a skirt, which made it easier for him to do bad things to her. She couldn't take it anymore and hugged his neck. "Tang Yu, not here," she said in a low voice. His fingers continued to tease her, and his voice was unbelievably husky. "There won't be anyone here." It wasn't a good idea to bring her to the Rose Garden or Shangyuan Hotel. It would be a disgrace to her if they went to a hotel. He nibbled on her little neck and said in an impatient voice, "Go to your place, HM." She didn't make a sound, so he continued to torture her. His voice was even hoarser and more alluring. "Chi-Chi? HM?" His slightly cold nose touched her soft little neck, but his breath was hot. She didn't make a sound, so he bit the softest spot on the back of her neck. Pei Chi-Chi let out a cry. She laid in his arms and bit him back, but as she bit him, the taste changed. Tang Yu leaned against the back of the seat and held her little head. When she came back to her senses and wanted to break free, he pressed her down forcefully and kissed her little mouth roughly. It was so intense that the car shook slightly. Her hands touched his shoulders, and his firm muscles tightened. He hugged her whole in his palms. She had no way to escape and could only curl up like a little frog to be kissed by him like that. His scorching kiss moved from her lips to the back of her neck, touching the most sensitive part of her body. He murmured, "Be good. Say it." She bit her little mouth and looked up at him, looking pitiful. "Tang, you bit her again." She let out a cry and hugged him tightly. He hugged her as if he was coaxing a child. "Chi-Chi, if you do this, I'll think you want to stay in the car." She was immediately fooled. She straightened up and glared at him accusingly. "No." His thin lips kissed her little mouth. "Then let's go to your place." He had to do it tonight. She had no idea how much effort he had put into keeping it a secret. Now it hurt like hell. It had only been a night, but he felt like a century had passed. Pei Chi-Chi was held in his arms. Smelling the burning masculine scent on his body, she was also a little aroused. Tang Yu pressed her head against his chest and stroked her fluffy hair. "Baby," she looked up at him. "Only noodles." He smiled. "All right." Carrying her with one arm, he opened the car door with the other and got out of the car with the noodles. Then, he swiftly closed the door and carried her to the apartment's elevator. When the elevator doors closed, he couldn't wait to press her against the elevator wall and kiss her. There's a surveillance camera. Her little face was turned to the side. Her face was red and her hair was slightly messy. She looked like he wanted to press her down and torture her. Tang Yu gently brushed away the stray hair on her face. Looking at her blushing face, he felt his heart soften. He reached up and broke the camera's head. Then, he held her little face and kissed her little mouth fiercely. She avoided him and struggled. He simply carried her with one hand and encircled her body, pressing against her. He did not kiss her as fiercely as before, but seductively. Chapter 9:11. The noodles in her hand fell to the ground, and his kiss deepened. When the elevator door opened, he carried her and kissed her to the door of her apartment. He pressed against her and said in a warm voice, "Give me the key card." Pei Chi-Chi looked up and touched the card with her little hands. Finally, she found the key card, but she couldn't swipe it. Tang Yu murmured in pain, "Go back to the car?" Pei Chi-Chi was a little more clear-headed. Only then did she remember that the key card belonged to Lao Can, and hers was in her bag. Biting her lip, she said with tears in her eyes, "I'll get it from Lao Kansas." Her legs were a little weak. She walked over and swiped the key card to Lao Can's apartment. Tang Yu was very concerned about his woman having another man's key card. He coughed lightly. "He won't have yours too, will he?" Pei Chi-Chi nodded, not knowing that Tang Yu's face was dark behind her. "Why did he turn off the lights?" She was a little surprised. The lights were on when she left. After turning on the lights, she wanted to signal Tang Yu to wait outside. However, when the lights were on, she saw Lao Can and Pei Huan playing happily in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. They were doing difficult lifts, and they were both naked. When she saw Pei Chi-Chi, Pei Huan screamed, "Pei Chi-Chi, didn't you go back to your apartment?" She covered her face and saw Tang Yu behind Pei Chi-Chi through the gaps between her fingers. She wanted to hide in a hole and be done with it. Lao Can had strong bronze muscles, and his mouth was full of xiong hair. He looked like he was full of hormones. Tang Yu rubbed his nose and retreated to wait for his woman. In his heart, he was wondering if his Chi-Chi would like a man with xiong fur. In order to save Pei Huan's face, Pei Chi-Chi closed the door first and then threw Lao Can's keycard to Pei Huan. "Here, you can act without worry in the future." Pei Huan was happy, but she was still worried. "Chi-Chi, but what about our meal? Shouldn't you learn to be my woman?" Old Can grabbed a shirt and wrapped it around Pei Huan while he put on a pair of shorts. In order to please him, Pei Huan immediately said that she would learn it. But later on, experiments proved that Pei Huan could not learn it even after studying for 20 years. Later on, when she got pregnant, Old Can learned how to cater to her picky stomach and improved his cooking skills to be as good as his photography skills. "Go inside and wash up. Lie down and wait for me." Old Can patted Pei Huan and said straightforwardly. Pei Huan immediately ran into the bedroom like a happy little wolf dog. Before she left, she even licked her lips and stared at Old Can's meat bone in a charming manner. "Hurry up." Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She looked at Lao Can and said, I don't remember you having a sweet tooth. Old Can lit a cigarette and held it between his fingers. There was a touch of deep thought in his eyes. He was completely different from the impulsive man who wanted Pei Huan just now. He liked Pei Huan, but at the same time, he also treated Pei Chi as his little sister. After a while, he asked indifferently, Have you thought it through? Pei Chi knew what he was asking, so she nodded and said, Yes, I have. Old King glanced in the direction of the door and smiled. Not bad. A man who did it 5 times a night couldn't be wrong. He kept thinking that the man in City H that night should be Tang Yu. Old King opened the door and leaned against the door to look at Tang Yu. He pointed at Pei Chi and said in a fierce tone, This is my disciple, Pei Chi. If you dare to bully her one day, I will beat you up. Chapter 9:12. Tang Yu smiled bitterly. At the same time, he was touched. When he was not around, his Chi came back to life because she met old Kansas. Although he was sad that her change was not because of him, he was indeed grateful to old Kansas. He thanked him very seriously. Old Kan went forward and patted his shoulder. We'll wait for you to get married together. Tang Yu said solemnly, Chi and I are husband and wife. So you and Pei Huan don't have to wait. Get married immediately. I'll be at ease this way. Old Kan raised an eyebrow. Aren't you and that girl divorced? Old Can, that's heart-wrenching. Tang Yu's expression was as if he hadn't made any noises for 3 days. It was very interesting. Old Can gave Pei Chi a push. All right, you spineless girl. I'll give her to you. Remember not to eat her up. Before closing the door, Old Can said shamelessly for Pei Huan's sake, Remember to make breakfast tomorrow. After the door was closed, Tang Yu stared at his door for a long time. Pei Chi swiped her phone to open her apartment and picked up the noodles. Tang Yu, the noodles are all burnt. Then I'll make it later. He came back to his senses, closed the door, and gently pulled off his tie. Pei Chi was a little afraid of this action of his. During the 3 days in America, he had tied her up with a tie in order to make her listen to him. Tang Yu smiled. I'll go take a shower first. He walked into her bedroom as he said this. He looked very natural, as if he was half the owner of the place. Pei Chi looked at him eagerly. Actually, she felt like she was cursing inside. Wasn't he in a hurry? She had to admit that Tang Yu was very good at seducing Pei Chi. He knew how to keep her in suspense. He took off his clothes in her bedroom and took a simple shower. He only wrapped a bath towel around his waist. The water droplets on the ends of his black hair rolled down his cheeks, then onto his firm chest and lower abdomen. Finally, they rolled into the narrow bath towel, causing one to think deeply. Pei Chi stood at the door and looked at the invincible man. Tang Yu threw a towel to her and said, Dry my hair for me. There was an imperceptible hoarseness in his voice. She nodded and walked over, but he was already leaning against the headboard, casually flipping through a magazine. Pei Chi carefully knelt beside him and gently wiped the water off his hair. He flipped through the magazine, his expression calm. Aren't you hungry? Pei Chi looked at the time. It was already 9:30. Tang Yu put the magazine aside and carried her over. He said lightly, Do it twice before you eat. Do it twice. He wanted to kiss her, but she quickly placed her hand on his mouth and said in a low voice, Tang Yu, I want to know what the child looks like. Is she okay? Tang Yu's movements paused, his gaze deep into her eyes. Pei Chi looked serious and a little uneasy. He looked at her for a while and smiled. Chi, do you really want to know? Yeah. Her voice was like a little lamb, and her body moved up. Tang Yu, I promise I won't look for her, okay? Because of her movement, Mr. Tang closed his eyes and let out a muffled groan. Pei Chi didn't notice his strangeness. She put her hands on his shoulders and looked at him eagerly. Tang Yu's fingers gently stroked her delicate little face. His fingers moved back, and her long black hair fell down. She heard him say, Chi, please me. Chapter 9:13. However, He still refused to show her the baby's photo even though he was comfortable and enjoying it. Pei Chi-Chi's long hair was scattered and wrapped around his body. She bit him angrily. Tang Yu, you didn't keep your promise. He chuckled and caressed the little thing in his arms. Chi-Chi, you were the one who fell for it on purpose. He whispered in her ear. You wanted to do that to me a long time ago, didn't you? I don't have such a hobby. She blushed and turned her back. She was extremely angry. She had even used her little hands and mouth, but he was acting shamelessly. Tang Yu hugged her from behind and kissed her little neck. Chi-Chi, go down and do it for me. I don't want to. She was acting shamelessly in front of him. Tang Yu was a little helpless. Chi-Chi. She pursed her lips. I don't want to. He looked at her angry little face and hugged her with a smile. Ignoring her punches and kicks, he carried her to the kitchen. There are no ingredients. She looked at him angrily. Tang Yu hugged her from behind and buried his face in her fragrant little neck. He nibbled gently. If there are no ingredients, I'll eat you. She could only do it for him obediently. She only had a big t-shirt on, which was loose, so it was convenient for him to touch her. Is it dirty? She turned her head and glanced at him. Her eyes were sparkling, and it was indescribably seductive. In a moment of passion, he hooked her little head over and kissed her for a long time. His big hands were getting more and more excessive. When he was satisfied, he then whispered in her ear, I've kissed you even if it's dirty. I'm ignoring you. She turned around and continued to do it. Tang Yu's slender body trapped her from behind. He was over 1.8 meters tall, and she was as petite as a child in his arms. His lips were close to her ear, and he said in a low voice, Chi-Chi, when you were eating just now, you didn't think it was dirty. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't bear to listen to him anymore. He had taken advantage of her, and yet he was still pretending to be obedient. Who had tricked her into eating it? She continued to ignore him, placed the noodles on the small dining table, and went to brush her teeth. Tang Yu didn't make things difficult for her anymore. He ate the noodles, washed the dishes, and smoked 2 cigarettes on the balcony before returning to the bedroom. Pei Chi-Chi was asleep, her back facing him. Still angry? He smiled silently and lay down on his side. His lips were on her little neck as he whispered, Pei Chi-Chi, how about I serve you as well? It was not that he had never done something like this before, but his Chi-Chi was a very shy little thing. Whenever he did that, she would not be able to hold on for long and would clamor for it to end. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was still gloomy. No way. He laughed lowly. Then what do you want? Sleep. She turned over and nestled her small body in his arms. She hugged his waist and said shamelessly, Don't do it, okay? She had not recovered from the 3 days in America, and now that he was here again, she really couldn't take it. Tang Yu hugged her, looking a little uncomfortable. After a long time, he hugged her and asked her softly, Chi-Chi, am I out of practice? Are you not feeling well? This kind of question, Pei Chi-Chi's little face was completely red. She didn't say anything and just buried her face in his arms. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. His voice was even deeper. Chi-Chi. She snorted softly. No. She meowed like a kitten. Too much. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment before he realized it. He seriously reflected on whether his needs were too strong. Chapter 9:14. Pei Chi-Chi heaved a sigh of relief. Tang Yu said considerately, I'll do it myself. She almost cried. How could she fall asleep when he did all these things to her? Because she didn't know when the next time would be, Tang Yu kept pestering her until the second half of the night. Pei Chi-Chi vaguely thought that she shouldn't pity Old Can's kidneys, but herself. At the same time, she was quite impressed by Pei Huan's stamina. That petite body was really durable. As a result, when he woke up at 8 in the morning, his head was still groggy. She reached out to turn off the alarm clock and closed her eyes for a while before she remembered to get up. Tang Yu hugged her and woke up too. After all, he had slept with her for the whole night. His voice was a little hoarse. I'll go. Pei Chi-Chi was a little surprised. Tang Yu had already gotten up, dressed in long pants and a shirt, and was nestled in her kitchen. Pei Chi lay straight for a while and decided to let him be. Pei Huan and Oldkin woke up at 9. She had a job at 11. Otherwise, she would have slept until the afternoon. Yawning, he walked to Pei Chi's small dining room and sat down to wait for breakfast. She hadn't woken up yet. She held her forehead and called out to Pei Chi softly. Pei Chi came out of the bedroom and Pei Huan's eyes widened. Chi, you woke up so late? Wouldn't her breakfast be ruined? Pei Chi greeted Old Can and sat down to wait for breakfast with Pei Huan. Old Can too. The three of them looked at each other. What about the last one? Could it be? Pei Huan was in disbelief. She turned to look at the kitchen and saw Tang Yu standing there, his slender and handsome figure. Pei Huan was a little infatuated and stared at him. He was so good-looking. Pei Huan admitted that she was a little infatuated, but she just admired him for a while. Old Can sneered. Pei Huan, go pack your luggage after breakfast. Pei Huan's gaze was still on the slender figure in the kitchen. She casually replied, why? Old Can continued to sneer without saying a word. It took Pei Huan about 10 seconds to realize what was going on, and a chill crept up her back. Old Can was angry. Moreover, she was angry because of jealousy. He quickly sat up straight and tried to please her. I'm just looking. It's the same as you men staring at beautiful women. Old Can sneered. I don't like to stare at pretty girls. Pei Huan was speechless. Old Can's expression was cold. Pei Huan, marriage is not a game. If you can't be sure, then let's go. Disbanded? Pei Huan blinked for a while, wiping away the moisture in her eyes. After a while, she raised her head. All right, Qin Mingzhu. So be it. I know you can't forget that old woman, Suimo. You call her name even in your dreams. Pei Huan said and stood up. I'll help you and that old woman grow old together. You won't have to live with her for the rest of your life. The veins on Old Can's forehead were popping. He narrowed his eyes and glared at her. She was being unreasonable. His eyes widened to the size of bells. Be reasonable. When did I ever dream of her? Of course you don't know what you said last night. Pei Huan was a little angry. Spend the rest of your life with that old woman. Qin Mingzhu, you can go confess to her and see if your goddess will care about you or sleep with those men. Before she could finish, she received a slap on her face. Chapter 9:15. Oldkin really liked Pei Huan and really wanted to live with her. He had only said those words out of anger and jealousy. However, what Pei Huan said about Suimo was a little too much, and Oldkin couldn't stand it. But he immediately regretted slapping her. His hand was as big as a fan, thick and rough. Her face must be hurting, right? He looked over and saw that Pei Huan's face was half swollen. Old Can's heart instantly ached, and he sounded a little uncomfortable. Does it hurt? He reached out, wanting to touch her. Pei Huan shrank back, and there was a tinge of hurt in her eyes. He still cared about Suimo. It was true that he called out Sumo's name at night. It wasn't that she didn't care, but she chose to tolerate it because she knew that she was useless and wasn't as capable as Suimo, who was doing so well in the industry. However, Oldkin had hit her just because of Suimo, just when they had agreed to get married. Pei Huan lifted her head and sneered at Old Kansas. You don't need to chase me away. I can leave on my own. Qin Mingzhu, it's my fault for holding you back. I thought that you liked me because you saved me, but I was being presumptuous. She forced back her tears, and there was a look of determination on her face. Whoever looks for me in the future is a bastard. Her arm was caught. She knew that it was Old Can, and she didn't want to see him. She twisted her face. Bastard, get lost. Don't touch me. Go and touch your white moonlight. Go and touch your dream girl. He wouldn't let go. Pei Huan pushed him away forcefully and said in a shrill voice, Qin Mingzhu, have you never seen a woman before? Or is it that all women other than Suimo are the same in your heart? They're all just passageways, right? Old Can's eyeballs were about to pop out, and his nostrils flared. He looked terrifying. After a long while, he finally said, Pei Huan, you know that's not the case. Pei Huan chuckled. Isn't it? Qin Mingzhu, do you think I'm a fool? She looked down at his hand that was grabbing her, and said softly, "Let go." Oldkin couldn't bear to let go, and she left the moment he let go. He did not know if he had called Sumo's name during the night. If he had, it must have been out of habit. This lass had been following him around like a puppy just a while ago, wishing that he was her master. But now, she had turned her back on him just like that. Pei Huan chuckled. "Do you think I'm capricious? Can Mingzhu, you were the one who told me to scram first. No matter how useless I, Pei Huan, am, I will not rely on an old man like you." As she spoke, she stepped on his foot and ran to the opposite door to pack her luggage. The pitiful Xiaomei helped her move it over last night. Oldkin chased after him. Tang Yu came out of the kitchen and made a Chinese-style breakfast. Surprisingly, it was quite decent. He looked at the door. "Are they okay?" Pei Chichi buried her head in her breakfast and said calmly, "It's fine. I can guarantee that Oldkin will throw Pei Huan on the bed later. There's nothing between them that can't be solved with their bodies." Tang Yu sat beside her. Even though he had just made breakfast, he still looked noble. He raised an eyebrow. Pei Chichi looked up and coughed lightly. "If the first time doesn't work, I'll do it twice." Before breakfast, Mr. Tang said, "Chichi, are you reminding me that I'll do the same thing if you get angry in the future?" He looked at her very seriously and asked, "Chichi, how many times do you want it to be?" "I'll try my best to cooperate." Chapter 9:16. Pei Huan ran to the opposite side and packed her clothes frantically. Oldkin kicked the door open. The little wolf had already packed her clothes and was about to leave with the small suitcase. Oldkin's head hurt a little. She looked at the suitcase that wasn't even zipped properly, revealing half of her asterisk. How did she survive until now? He glared at her. "Are you really leaving?" Pei Huan raised her head and tried hard not to cry. He was just a man. She still had this bit of backbone. "That's right," he said decisively. Oldkin took a step back and leaned against the side. He stared at her with a burning gaze. "You're not coming back?" "Yes." She was still firm. Oldkin's eyebrows twitched and she rubbed the space between her eyebrows. "I'm going to book a house this afternoon." "That's great. You happen to be living with that old woman," Suamo, Pei Huan said viciously. "You can kneel in front of her and beg. Maybe she'll be touched." Oldkin's veins popped again. "Pei Huan, don't go too far." "Fine, I'm leaving. I won't hinder the marriage of the great scholar Can and talented Lady Su. I'm shallow. I stare at good-looking men. I don't fucking think about men at night and call out people's names in my sleep." Pei Huan sneered. "Goodbye." She then pulled the suitcase and walked out. Along the way, tears flowed down her cheeks. However, she didn't care about it. She cried silently and opened the door to leave. Oldkin pulled her back and his voice softened a little. "Are you really leaving?" Pei Huan didn't look back. She held the suitcase so tightly that her fingertips turned white. She looked down at her toes and said in a low voice, "Can Mingzhu, I like you very much, but it doesn't mean that I'll give in to you unconditionally. I've said that we have to be clean, not just physically, but also in our hearts." She paused for a moment and said, "I saw Lin Jianrong yesterday. I liked him and loved him. It's not that I didn't feel anything, but I put you first. I've completely let it go. But what about you? Do you dare to say that you intend to drive Suimo out of your heart? Do you dare to say that every time after we've done it, you would hug me and reminisce about the times you and that old woman used to be in bed?" As Pei Huan spoke, she began to cry again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said fiercely, "That's it. You continue to be infatuated with your love. I'll look for my man." Her words made Lao Can's heart extremely uncomfortable. In his heart, Pei Huan had always been superficial. He didn't hate her superficiality. On the contrary, she was very cute. He knew that she passionately liked him, and he also liked her. But only now did he understand that Pei Huan's love for him and his love for her were different. What she wanted was far more than what he was willing to give. He grabbed her arm and refused to let go. Pei Huan's voice was low as she said, "Can Mingzhu, look, just one sentence, and we can be like this on the battlefield. I don't want to be like this for many years to come. She sobbed uncontrollably, because from that moment on, she wanted to regain her dignity as a woman. There was once a man who didn't love her, and she stubbornly chose to take revenge. But Laucan didn't love her, and she chose to let him be. He didn't let go, and she got angry. She threw the entire suitcase at his feet and howled. Pei Huan's face was full of tears as she cried, "Can Mingzhu, I'll let you be with that old woman, all right? Let go of me. Do you want to find a woman to spend money on?" Chapter 9:17. Pei Huan was throwing a tantrum because she wanted more. He breathed softly and looked at the little woman who was crying in front of him. His rough fingers wiped away her tears. Pei Huan turned her face away to avoid his touch and wanted to leave again. Oldkin hugged her and pressed her into his beast-like arms. His voice was gentle like never before. "Are you really leaving?" Pei Huan pushed him, but he didn't budge. Oldkin pressed her down. "You won't be able to enjoy my service after you leave." He moved his face away slightly and stared into her eyes. "Don't you like it when I kiss you and say that my tongue brush is better than that thing?" Pei Huan wanted to scold him, but she bit her tongue the moment she opened her mouth. She stared at him with tears in her eyes. Old Can's expression became gentler, and so did his voice. "Huan Huan, let's not talk about this anymore, okay?" He looked a little uncomfortable. "If you don't mention that old woman, I won't think about her. If you mention it, I dare to think about her." Pei Huan's eyes widened in disbelief. Oldkin actually said, "Old woman." She looked really cute. Oldkin picked her up and carried her to the bedroom, regardless of her struggle. "You're crying so sadly. Let me comfort you." The door was violently kicked shut, and then Pei Huan was comforted by Little Steel. While being comforted, she cried and scolded, "Can Mingzhu, you pervert?" Pei Chi finished her breakfast calmly, but Tang Yu was a little doubtful. They quarreled so fiercely just now. Would Old Can and Pei Huan make up? But when he left, he happened to see Pei Huan going out to catch up with her work. Old Can was wearing a pair of sunglasses and looked very cool. But at this time, Pei Huan had turned into a little wolf dog again. Tang Yu was silent. Pei Huan was much easier to coax than Pei Chi. In the afternoon, Old Can took Pei Huan to book a room. It was a small and cute 3-story villa in the suburbs of B City. Pei Huan liked it very much. She and Old Can got used to each other's temperament during the quarrel and rolling in the sheets. They also understood each other's temperament and no longer touched each other's bottom line. Their relationship gradually stabilized. Pei Chi went to the magazine office to cancel her leave. The chief editor patted her on the shoulder happily and said earnestly, "Little Pei, you're a good person." The higher-ups are especially optimistic about one this time. They said that they're going to work hard on the cover and make it a hit. Pei Chi mumbled, "Chief editor, why don't you just do a photo shoot? Make it as loud as you want it to be." "Little Pei, what are you talking about?" The managing editor couldn't believe his ears. Xiao Pei was a virtuous lady. How could she say such crude words? Pei Chi looked innocent. "I didn't say anything." The editor-in-chief chose to ignore it. After all, the other party was a South African star. He coughed lightly. "Anyway, this time, we must crush that unsophisticated and tacky man. This kind of magazine with no integrity can never be compared to our magazine." When Pei Chi left, he scratched his head. Success in one go. Let Tang Yu reveal a little? The shoot was done in Tang Yu's office. Pei Chi specially invited Old Kansas. In the beginning, Tang Yu was against it. He only wanted Pei Chi to do the shoot, but he was persuaded in the end. Tang Yu was dressed in a beige suit. He sat on the sofa in front of the French windows. In his hand was a cup of mantegnine, which Xiao Ran had just made for him. Oldkin had been taking photos of all kinds of young and handsome men for many years. He was used to seeing handsome men, but when he saw this, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. This was fucking cool. Chapter 9:18. They just needed to take a few more photos and put them on the cover. Pei Chi was trying to persuade Tang Yu to unbutton his collar when Old Can's phone rang. It was Pei Huan's. Old Can's expression softened, and he answered the phone in a soft voice. Yes, I'm in Shengyuan. I'll pick you up later. He paused for a moment and said, Come over and wait for me. Old Can put away the phone and explained, Pei Huan happens to be nearby. I asked her to come over, and we'll have dinner together later. He looked at Pei Chi and said that because of Tang Yu's special status, he didn't get a share. Xiao Ran was also there. Looking at his CEO's face, he laughed to himself. Then he went to the door to wait for Pei Huan. He felt very strange. Pei Huan used to have a very bad reputation. She was really a bad person, willful and selfish. Now she had turned over a new leaf and even got a man like Old Kansas. She was really lucky. Although Old Can had been a playboy, men and women were different in this matter. It could only be said that the world was still fair to Pei Huan. Pei Huan came over quickly, followed by Xiao Mei. Pei Huan didn't know what scene she was filming. She was wearing a black evening gown and had exquisite makeup on her face. As soon as she came in, she complained, The dressing room is so bad today. I don't want to stay a minute longer. Xiao Ran could see that the relationship between Pei Chi and Pei Huan had thawed. He was about to take Pei Huan to the staff lounge to do her makeup when Old Can stopped him. Wait a minute. Pei Huan exclaimed and walked over, her eyes sparkling with little red hearts. Old Can knocked her on the head. What are you thinking about? He ordered her, sit over there. Pei Huan hesitated when she saw that it was Tang Yu's side, but Tang Yu didn't care. Pei Huan looked at Old Can carefully. Not jealous anymore? Be serious and work. Old Can gestured with his eyes, and Pei Huan sat down. She sat next to Tang Yu and leaned close to him. Her small hands were even holding Tang Yu's arm in a very photogenic manner. She rested her face on his shoulder and winked at Lao Can provocatively. Is this okay? Lao Can scolded her as if it was the first time she had patted her. What are you trying to do? Sell yourself? Pei Huan felt a little wronged, and there were no outsiders here, so she said softly, the one who sold herself was Pei Chi. The woman she was talking about was helping Tang Yu tidy up his trousers. She was half kneeling on the carpet, looking up at Tang Yu, and her eyes were a little blurred. She was also dressed in black today, but it was a very simple black t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail, and she looked like the most ordinary and elegant waitress. However, Pei Huan sat beside Tang Yu, dressed in luxurious clothes, and had a resentful gaze. Tang Yu's eyes were fixed on Pei Chi, and he looked down at her. Old Can was full of passion and took a few photos. The sound of the shutter made Pei Huan look up. Pei Chi also wanted to turn around, but Tang Yu pressed her on his leg. Old Can took a few more photos. These photos had a special sense of a story, and they were not just stiff photos. He looked at the photos and put away the camera. Let's call it a day. Pei Huan ran over. That's it? Do I have money to take it? Old Can snorted. I'm willing to take photos of you, and you still want money? Pei Chi hit him when he was down. In the past, Old Can always took money from others when he took photos. Pei Huan understood for a while, and then she pulled Old Can's ear and said angrily, Can Mingzhu, you shameless old man. It was obvious that it was not a good thing. Old Can looked at his little disciple reproachfully. Chapter 9:19. Old Can had done a good job of keeping it a secret. When the one magazine came out, Pei Chi only saw the true face on the cover. That set of photos was shocking. There were 3 main characters, and they were very vivid. Her and Tang Yu's gazes were well captured, and their postures were a little ambiguous. Her hand was on Tang Yu's knee, and Tang Yu's body was slightly tilted towards her. Pei Huan also had a good grasp of the camera. Although she was hugging Tang Yu's arm, there was an inexplicable emptiness in her eyes, as if she was afraid, as if she was trying to hold on to something. The 3 of them always made people think of a lot of stories. Later readers had automatically replaced Pei Huan with Shanlian, which was quite ironic when you thought about it. In the end, this group of magazines was not bundled together with Jiren, because everyone agreed that this magazine was good enough to take the lead. In the early stages, The magazine's development department had won over several big-name sponsors, two of which were previously from Man magazine. They had leveraged Man, which had been founded by Shun Lian single-handedly. Of course, there was a lot of bloodshed in the process, but nothing could be changed. No one could stop the rise of one. The editor-in-chief had made up his mind. The circulation was twice that of the previous Jarn magazine, but even so, it was still sold out within 2 days. The reason was that the cover and the inside pages were not inferior to the photos. In particular, this was Old Can's work, which was not easy to get. Now that it could be bought for 20 yuan a copy, who wouldn't want it? Not only that, because the first issue was Tangyu, the elites of the business world were also proud of this magazine to increase their popularity. Young celebrities could only stare at it helplessly. And the biggest winner of this party was Pei Huan, who had unexpectedly become popular again. For a time, she was also pushed to the B-list in the entertainment industry. This was because she had shot a magazine with Tangyu, which was very high status. Pei Huan had successfully cleared her name. The other female lead, Pei Qiqi, was a lot more mysterious. All the upper-class ladies could recognize that she was Tang Yu's ex-wife. Although his squatting posture made him look humble, the affection in Tang Yu's eyes was unmistakable. These two were still entangled. This was what Shen Lian couldn't stand the most. Wherever she went, one's existence was living in Pei Qiqi's shadow. She went to Shengyuan again to cause trouble with Tang Yu, but this time, she didn't even enter Shengyuan's gate. Shen Lian was very uneasy. She frantically dialed Tang Yu's number, but he did not answer. Later, she softened and sent him a message saying that it was her fault for going to the rose garden last time and begged him to forgive her. Finally, through Xiao Ran, he confirmed that Tang Yu would support him in the fashion ceremony next week. She knew that Pei Qiqi would also be there. At that time, she would ruthlessly crush Pei Qiqi and let Tang Yu know who was the most suitable woman for him. In the president's office of Shengyuan, Xiao Ran stood behind Tang Yu in silence. As the chief secretary, Xiao Ran knew far more than others. She was a little shocked about the current situation of Shengyuan. On the surface, it looked calm, but inside, it was already different. The top management and middle management had been transferred, and their whereabouts were unknown. Xiao Ran hesitated and said softly, "President, why do you indulge her like this?" She was referring to Shan Lian. Tang Yu had a small cigarette, but burning on his fingertips, and said indifferently, "It will end soon." He turned around and looked at Xiao Ran. Shun Lian owns 20% of Shengyuan shares. Xiao Ran was shocked. Chapter 920. Tang Yu smiled. "You should be able to tell. But this is far from the final result. Even if Shengyuan is an empty shell, Shun Lian will still benefit from it." Xiao Ran was shocked. She couldn't believe that a noble man like him, who had always been in the clouds, would be willing to fall into the dust. Tang Yu was still smiling. What's wrong? He had everything he had since he was a child. Now, he just wanted to have Qiqi and their child. He knew that if he told Pei Qiqi about Xiaoxin's background, she would really lose her fighting spirit. Deep down in her bones, his Qiqi did not like to be a strong woman. She was more interested in photography. So, he could only cruelly whip her. Thinking of her, Tang Yu's lips curved into a gentle smile. Xiao Ran's heart also softened a lot. Does Qiqi know? Tang Yu grunted and turned around. At this moment, he looked a little tired. It seemed that he hadn't really rested for the past 2 years. Xiao Ran's eyes became hot. Tang Yu said calmly, "There's a draft on the table. Leak it to the media for me. Make it look good and don't let anyone find out." Xiao Ran's eyes fell on the table. She slowly walked over and picked it up. After a few glances, she was a little shocked. Was Tang Yu trying to kill Shen Lian? She looked up and hesitated. "Will this affect your reputation?" "That's not important," he said calmly. What he wanted to do was to make sure that Shen Lian couldn't hurt Qiqi. It had been half a month since he last saw Qiqi. He missed her very much, but for her safety, he endured it. Even if the whole world knew that he liked and loved her, he couldn't see her often. Occasionally, he would bump into her and see her carrying a camera and shuttling through the crowd. Occasionally, she would see him sitting in the car, and she would smile at him. However, he knew that she missed the child. She really wanted to know what the child looked like, where the child was, and whether the child was well. But when he said it wasn't safe, she really didn't ask anymore. In his heart, there was always an indescribable sadness and heartache. In the end, Tang Yu couldn't attend the fashion ceremony because of the company's business in the U.S. He flew to the U.S. the day before, and Shen Lian couldn't do anything about it. However, she was very excited because Tang Yu was not here. She could deal with Pei Chi-Chi, the bitch. On Saturday night, the annual fashion ceremony was held at a star-rated resort. As early as a month ago, the resort had begun to clear the guests and prepare the venue. That night, the stars shone brightly, and many big shots came. What surprised Pei Chi-Chi the most was that Empress Yi had also come. It had been a long time since Yi Liangqiu had any works. She didn't have any arrangements in the beginning because the company was preparing for her to go abroad, and then she was shelved. But tonight, she appeared with Qin Anlin. The scene was boiling with excitement because of Empress Ye's arrival. The media chased after her, mainly asking about her schedule and future development. Yi Liangqiu stood next to Qin Anlin. Her makeup was perfect, and she said calmly, "I might be taking a break from the entertainment industry to spend some time with my family." The reporters were in an uproar. Qin Anlin's expression was also indifferent, as if he had already known about it. He didn't answer any of the reporters' questions. Chapter 9:21. Looking at Qin Anlin's attitude, Pei Chi-Chi knew that Yi Liangqiu still had some influence in King. Otherwise, Qin Anlin wouldn't have brought her to a public event without anyone knowing. However, she didn't know whether Shi Liangqiu or Qin Anlin would win in the end. She came with Lao Kansas. It was rare for Lao Kan to dress formally, and he was also shaved, so they looked very harmonious. Pei Chi-Chi was wearing a pure blue evening gown with a one-shoulder design. It hugged her petite figure and slender waist well, especially the snow-white skin on her back. Her long hair was gently tied up, and around her neck was a dazzling diamond necklace. Oldkin had given it to her, saying that it was sponsored by a certain brand, but she would have to return it after using it. She held Lao Kan's arm and nodded when she saw Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin's gaze was unfathomable as he stared at her without saying a word. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Of course, Pei Chi-Chi wouldn't stick her face to his cold shoulder, so she walked into the venue with Lao Kansas. Most of the people were already seated. She and Lao Kan were seated in the third row. After sitting down, she realized that Shen Lian was sitting not far away and was looking at her coldly. Similar to Shen Lian's mood, her gown was also black, with a hint of green in the green. Pei Chi-Chi pretended that she didn't see anything and sat down with Lao Kan calmly. The staff were busy in front, and Su Mo was standing in the middle of the stage in a silver gown. She was checking her lines with the male host with a script in her hand. Her makeup was exquisite and flawless. Pei Chi-Chi turned to look at Lao Kan and realized that he was also looking at Su Mo. She coughed and said, "If Pei Huan sees that look in your eyes, there will be a bloodbath." Lao Kan looked away and smiled. "I just feel that Su Mo is an ordinary woman. She would age too." No matter how well she took care of herself, there was still an aged look on her face. Olkin wasn't sure if he was the same as most men, but he really liked the younger Pei Huan more. He liked her youthful and supple body, as well as her vitality. As he thought about this, he suddenly met Sumo's gaze. In that instant, Lao Kan felt a little complicated. It was as if he had betrayed Sumo. Sumo knew how many women had come and gone over the years, but he had never felt this way. However, Pei Huan was different. He had fallen in love with her and wanted to marry her. The veins on Lao Kan's forehead bulged when he saw the resentment in Sumo's eyes. Pei Chi-Chi looked on coldly from the side. She had a bad feeling about this. Old Kan and Sumo were exchanging flirtatious glances. What if Sumo changed her mind at this critical juncture? Pei Huan wouldn't have anything to do with it, right? Pei Chi-Chi thought to herself, but she didn't say anything. It was also at this time that Pei Huan also came over. She was wearing a smoky gray evening gown and looked quite classy. She was as classy as Heavenly Empress Yi. When she looked at Old Can, her little face was tense and she didn't make a sound. Old Can was a little unsure if she had seen something just now, but he didn't dare ask. He watched as she sat down next to Qin Anlin, with Empress Yi on either side. Anyone could tell that Pei Huan was the Empress. Chapter 922. Pei Huan was different. That photo was enough to prove that she wasn't just a vase. There was a story behind her eyes. Coupled with Empress Ye's cold shoulder, Pei Huan seemed to be in her prime again. She had taken on a few endorsements for second-tier brands, and her net worth had skyrocketed. Pei Chi looked at Laucan sympathetically and said in a low voice, "You might be in trouble." Laucan sat upright and didn't say a word. However, his gaze was no longer on Suemo, but on Pei Huan. Pei Chi looked at him for a while and changed the topic. She whispered into Lao Can's ear, "I heard from Amy that man bribed the judges. They will be the winner of the media award this time. Do you have any news? Did you hear anything from the chief editor?" Lao Can coughed lightly. "The Rising Star Award is definitely the one. No one can say anything about their influence, but it's hard to say for the media award. After all, one is backed by Jean Taiha, and Shunlian is trying her best to compete with you. I think, Xian." Pei Chi smiled and didn't say anything else. The ceremony began and the lights dimmed, leaving only the lights on the stage. After flickering for a while, the lights came back on. Suemo and the male host walked up from backstage together. She lifted the hem of her dress and looked elegant. Pei Chi looked at them and admitted that even Pei Huan might not be as determined as Sumo if she cultivated for another 30 years. Sumo had a wide network in the entertainment industry. Even someone like Qin Anlin would look up to her. Tonight's ceremony was divided into two areas. One was for entertainment figures, and the other was for fashion media. It was no surprise that Heavenly Empress Yi won the Power Star Award. This award was extremely valuable and was ranked according to the income of the celebrities. Heavenly Empress Yi had earned more than $1 billion in the previous year, far ahead of the runner-up. When she went up on stage to receive the award, there was a round of applause. As a diva, Yi Liangqiu had long been trained to keep her composure. She looked at the camera and smiled faintly. "I would like to thank my employer, King Entertainment. I would like to thank my boss, Qin Anlin. I would also like to thank my manager, Sister Quan. I would also like to thank my fans for not giving up on me after all these years." She raised the trophy and smiled. "Trust me, I'll be back soon." There was a touch of indifference and calmness on her face. It was definitely not something that those popular young stars could compare to. The loyal fans were screaming, "Yi Liangqiu! Yi Liangqiu!" Yi Liangqiu waved at them and left the backstage. She had the demeanor of a heavenly queen. As Qin Anlin sat, his assistant, Kimmy, whispered, "Sister Quan is really good at leading people." In just a few years, Yi Liangqiu has already mastered the invincible Vajrabadi. Although she said that she was being frozen, her attitude was so calm that no one could guess what she was thinking. Qin Anlin looked in the direction where she left. It was dark there. He smiled coldly. A person who has something to ask will not give up on everything that she has. The more indifferent Yi Liangqiu was, the more she couldn't let go of something in her heart. However, Qin Anlin didn't know what she wanted, and he didn't want to guess. Freezing her might make her confess a little. Kimmy didn't say anything else, because Yi Liangqiu wasn't someone he could casually talk about. She might be frozen today, but tomorrow, President Qin might pamper her again. At this moment, the atmosphere was at its climax. Those fans were sad because of Yi Liangqiu's temporary retreat. They even called out Yi Liangqiu's name hoarsely. It was very tragic. Chapter 923. Coincidentally, Sue Mo had also signed up for the Most Influential Newcomer Award. To her surprise, it was Pei Huan. To her surprise, she had won the award based on a magazine cover without any other works. Pei Huan's popularity was bizarre. Because of that photo, many fans felt sorry for her and said that they owed Pei Huan a love story. This topic had been hyped up for a long time, but it was actually created by King Entertainment. Pei Huan was also a little shocked. She covered her lips with her fingernail polish, and the 10-carat diamond ring on her finger was blinding. She blinked her tears away and went up on stage. She almost couldn't walk properly. She paused for a moment when she passed by Suemo, but she quickly continued walking forward. She received the trophy from the guest presenter and looked down. Her voice was choked with emotion as she said, "Thank you to everyone who loves me and my fans. It was your support that allowed me to get to where I am today." Her nose was a little red and her voice was nasal. She even had to wipe the tears from her eyes, however. In Pei Chichi's eyes, Pei Huan was more dazzling than ever before. This Pei Huan deserved everything beautiful, including Old Can's love. Pei Huan started rambling. She looked at Old Can below the stage and her gaze turned gentle. "I think I found my love. From now on, I'm no longer alone." Old Can looked at her. He actually felt proud of this good-for-nothing. Pei Huan walked a little too fast when she got off the stage and almost fell. Old Can almost rushed up to help her up. Fortunately, Pei Huan steadied herself in time. She winked at Old Can, and Old Can was instantly shocked. Suemo was a little distracted as she watched the interaction between Pei Huan and Old Can. The male lead saved the day and saved himself from embarrassment. He signed up for the Most Influential Newcomer Media Award. Theon. The male host was quite excited because the person receiving the award was Pei Chichi from the magazine. Pei Chichi smiled and went up on stage with her dress in a dignified manner. Old Can really wanted to hold Pei Huan up and watch how she walked. Pei Chichi went up on stage and received the trophy. She smiled and said, "Thank you for your trust in us, the one. Thank you for once trust. I believe that as media personnel, we will report more realistically with more positive energy. Thank you." The audience applauded, and Pei Chichi got off the stage. Next, Suemo reported for the Best Media Award. This was the most important award of the night. It meant that the media would have the most collaborations with celebrities next year, and it also meant the direction of the media's traffic. Xinlian slightly raised her head. She had already opened up the top and the bottom. Jean Tai and the man below were determined to win. Suemo looked at the list and paused for a moment. Then, she calmly reported, "Jarin Magazine." As soon as the 4 words came out, the audience burst into applause. Xinlian's face was ashen as she muttered, "How is this possible?" She ignored her manners and stood up. "Miss Su, I suspect that you have selfish motives and lied about the results." Suemo lowered her eyes and looked straight into Xinlian's eyes. Then, she smiled. "President Shen, are you suspecting me?" "Yes," Xinlian said without hesitation. Suemo lowered her eyes and smiled. "Why should I? Don't tell me President Shun knew the results beforehand?" Xinlian pursed her lips and didn't say a word. She secretly hated Suemo. This woman was a demon, and an old demon at that. She was hard to deal with. Chapter 9:24. Suemo smiled, looking very magnanimous. "If you're worried, you can go up and have a look." Xinlian probably wouldn't do something like going up on stage directly, so she asked someone she could trust to go and have a look. That person went over to Suemo and looked down with a troubled expression. Xinlian's face darkened when she saw that. She had lost. She had lost to Pei Chichi once again. Once again, she had lost face in front of everyone. Xinlian flicked her sleeves and left. From that day onwards, she hated Suemo. Suemo sneered as she watched Xinlian leave. "Little girl, how dare you fight with me? You're still too young." In fact, Xinlian's dirty tricks had long been reported. In private, the judges had removed Man from the list of nominees, but Xinlian didn't know about it. However, it wasn't because of the so-called fairness and justice. It was because there was a bigger boss than Xinlian who didn't want Xinlian to have an easy time. Frankly speaking, Suemo had received $5 million in this shady deal. There was no other way. Behind these ostentatious things, there was cruelty. Everything could be bought with money, just like Empress Ye's award. She had originally received news that she had been frozen, but King Entertainment had sent her 10 million yuan. Suemo watched as Shun Lian left and smiled mockingly. She was just a little girl with a good family background. She didn't have much ability, so everything was too simple. The ceremony wouldn't be interrupted because of Shun Lian's incident. There were only some small awards after that, and they weren't that valuable. Since Jaran magazine had won this time, Pei Chi and Lao Can would naturally stay to attend the reception. In the distance, Pei Huan was holding a glass and talking to a few investors. Lao Can looked at her absent-mindedly. Pei Huan would occasionally glance over and exchange flirtatious glances. Pei Chi drank 2 glasses of fruit wine, and her face was a little hot. She covered her face and said, "Lao Can, isn't it too embarrassing for you to be naked like this?" Old Can had grown a small beard and a sexy cyan chin. He finished the wine in his glass in one gulp, put the glass on the waiter's tray, and grinned. "Pei Chi, do you want to go home with us? I'm sure you'll be more embarrassed than you are now." Pei Chi felt that Lao Can was already shameless enough in the past, but now he was several levels higher, just like Pei Huan's cup. Just as Lao Can was thinking about how he was going to tear Pei Huan's gown, a gentle voice came from beside him, "Mingzhu." Old Can froze for a moment. All these years, some people called him Old Can, and some called him Can Mingzhu, but only Suemo called him Mingzhu, and that was many years ago. Old Can's gaze was filled with nostalgia. He turned to look at Suemo. She had already changed into a light green gown and had her breasts exposed. She looked intimidating. He remembered that he used to like to bury himself there, and she would hook her arms around his waist and say bad things about him. They would quarrel until the middle of the night, like 2 children, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. What Old Can and Suemo had experienced wasn't something that Pei Huan could compare to. Even when Suemo appeared in front of Old Can wasn't indifferent. His eyebrows twitched as he looked at Suemo, who was like a blooming lotus, looking 10 years younger. Pei Chi was a girl, so she naturally had a meticulous mind. Suemo was dressed like this, and it was obvious that she was provoking Pei Huan. However, Pei Chi wouldn't expose her and had to be friendly. Love was important, and there was no room for mistakes. Since Pei Huan was so silly, she naturally had to help her. Chapter 9:25. Suemo first looked at Lao Can and saw a hint of amazement in his eyes. That was exactly what she wanted. Then, she shifted her gaze to Pei Chi. Sumo's attitude towards Pei Chi was different. She was a white bone demon in the workplace. How could she not sense the brewing storm? The reason why Pei Chi could have such a smooth journey was because he had Tang Yu behind him. Sheng Yuan or Tang Yu's support would allow Pei Chi to reach the peak of his life. This was something that not even several Jin Taihe could achieve. More importantly, Pei Chi was Lao Can's beloved disciple. Even if Lao Can stopped being with Pei Chi, she would still be his disciple. Suemo could tell that Pei Chi's opinion was crucial to Lao Can's decision. Hence, she was especially polite to Pei Chi. Pei Chi returned a smile, but her nerves were tense. She looked at Pei Huan in the distance. "That idiot." Suemo smiled and said, "Chi, can I talk to your master alone for a while?" Pei Chi nodded. "Of course." As she spoke, she gave Lao Can a meaningful look. Lao Can understood the meaning behind her gaze. Lao Can wasn't a blockhead. Besides, he knew Suemo very well. It was better to talk about some things. It wasn't good to keep it bottled up. Lao Can and Suemo walked to the balcony, which was hidden and dark. Pei Chi looked at it deeply. She heard the sound of high heels. It was Pei Huan. Pei Chi reached out to hold her and said in a low voice, "Are you going to make a scene with Lao Can?" Pei Huan gritted her teeth. "I knew that old woman was up to no good. Look at how she's dressed up. She's obviously trying to seduce Lao Kansas, since you know. Why did you expose her?" Pei Chi tugged at her and only let her go after she had calmed down. "You clearly know about their past, and you clearly know that Lao Can cares about Suemo. Aren't you playing right into Sumo's hands by throwing a tantrum?" Pei Chi sneered. Being smart is always something that needs to be highlighted. Pei Huan almost jumped up. Pei Chi, are you saying I'm stupid? Isn't that obvious? It's the truth. Pei Chi said. Pei Huan, think about it. What's your advantage over Suimo? Pei Huan's expression was as if he had eaten digested food. He mumbled but couldn't say anything. Pei Chi continued, young and beautiful. Even if she's a little willful, she's still cute. This is the Suimo you're talking about. No matter how much she pretends, she won't be able to do it because of her age. These words made Pei Huan's heart feel extremely comfortable and happy. Women are vain. Pei Chi quickly destroyed her confidence. But you're less mature and sophisticated than Suimo. I think I'm pretty sophisticated too. Pei Huan mumbled unhappily. Pei Chi looked at her and smiled. If you go and argue with him now, you'll embarrass them like a shrew. Pei Huan, do you think you and Lao Can will be done with each other given that he still has some feelings for Suimo? Pei Huan's eyes widened. She couldn't be sure. After a while, she asked reluctantly, then are we going to let the adulterer and adulterer flirt there? Chapter 9:26. Pei Huan didn't understand. She felt sad when she saw Lao Can and the old woman together. However, she believed in Pei Chi. Chi said all that for her own good. So, she gritted her teeth and said, that bitch got lucky. Then, her expression changed again. She looked at Pei Chi with admiration and said, Chi, when did you become so cunning? You're amazing. Pei Chi snorted and drank a glass of fruit wine. She didn't notice that the wine was specially made, and her face became hot after drinking it. She looked at Pei Huan and sneered. I remember you hated me since you were young and said that I was sinister. I won't dare to do it again. Pei Huan hugged her arm and looked at the balcony with daggers in her eyes. If Lao Can dares to let me down, I'll cripple him tonight. On the balcony, Oldkin shuddered. He and Suimo stood face to face, each holding a cocktail in their hands. The smoky gray gauze curtains blocked all prying eyes, giving the narrow space a romantic feel. Suimo was dressed in light green, just like how she was when they first met. Oldkin felt a little drunk, but he still managed to maintain a bit of sobriety. This sobriety was called Pei Huan. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the night of B City's suburbs was beautiful and quiet. Sumo's face turned slightly red. She raised her head and looked at the man who looked rough on the outside, but was actually meticulous on the inside. Her eyes were mesmerized. Mingzhu, if I want to settle down, would that person be you? Lao Can's eyebrows twitched. Although he had already guessed Sumo's intention, he still couldn't bear it when she said it out loud. Suimo looked down. That moment of flirtatiousness was indeed not something a little girl like Pei Huan could compare with. She lowered her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, Mingzhu, after so many years, I don't believe that I'll lose to a little girl. She looked up at Lao Can with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Do you love her? Are you with her as passionate as we are when we do it together? Is she able to satisfy your endless needs? Is she able to keep you up all night? Is she able to keep you up? She asked a lot of questions, but Old Can was speechless. His black eyes stared at the woman he had loved for many years, the woman he had kept in his heart for many years. Suimo was beautiful in the beginning, just like Pei Chi now. In the beginning, he treated Chi well because he saw Sumo's shadow in her. However, he had always doted on her like a child. He didn't expect that he would fall into the hands of Pei Huan, a good-for-nothing girl of the same age as Pei Chi. Truth be told, Lao Can admired Suimo from the bottom of his heart. After all, Pei Huan couldn't catch up to her even if he took a helicopter. However, he was intimidated by her confession of love. Suimo, didn't you lose to Pei Huan? She's just a little girl and doesn't have any tricks up her sleeves. She only knows how to cry and throw a tantrum. It's just that she probably wants to kill me now that I'm talking to you here. As Lao Can spoke, his heart was as clear as a mirror. He knew what he wanted. It wasn't the meticulous Suimo, the sophisticated Suimo, or the best Suimo, but the silly and bad-tempered Pei Huan. He had always wanted that innocence, and Suemo couldn't give it to him anymore. Chapter 9:27. He nodded at Suemo. I'm sorry, Suemo. I don't want Pei Huan to be unhappy. That girl loves to cry and throw a tantrum. With that said, he strode out without turning back. He would never be reluctant to leave again. Suemo looked at his back view and murmured, "Who said that Pei Huan doesn't have any tricks up her sleeve? Mingzhu, aren't you in love with her?" Suemo chuckled and gulped down the wine in her glass. From now on, she was really alone. Oldkin walked back to the banquet hall. Pei Chichi was no longer there, and Pei Huan was the only one there. Pei Huan's eyes turned red when she saw Old Can, and she looked at him with tears in her eyes. Old Can's heart was filled with an indescribable tenderness. He reached out and patted her little head. "All right, let's go home." Pei Huan sniffled. Chi-Chi went to the washroom. "I'm going to wait for her." Old Can took out his phone from his pocket and dialed Xiao Mei's number, asking her to wait there. He hugged Pei Huan and left first. Pei Huan was still a little worried as she walked. Oldkin said gruffly, "I won't lose her." However, Pei Chi-Chi was drunk. She splashed cold water on her face in the washroom, trying to cool down. No matter how hard she tried, her face was still hot. When she walked in the corridor, her head was still dizzy and her legs were weak. The corridor was dim under the yellow light, and it felt warm on her body. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't walk anymore. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her petite body in the evening gown was trembling slightly, and she looked like she couldn't handle the alcohol. Suddenly, following a scorching aura, she was fiercely pressed against the wall. Pei Chi-Chi opened her eyes abruptly, and Qin Anlin's handsome face was right in front of her. He stared at her intensely, and the heat in his eyes seemed to be scalding her. Pei Chi-Chi's body was pressed against the wall behind her, and she looked into his eyes. She struggled with all her might, but she couldn't break free. She said angrily, "Qin Anlin, what are you doing?" Qin Anlin leaned forward and caressed her little face with his slender fingers. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. "Can Mingzhu and Pei Huan have already left?" Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips. She had sobered up from her drunken stupor. She leaned back and said weakly, "Thank you, President Qin, for your reminder. I thought you would thank me for carrying you to the hospital last time," he said as his fingers moved to her lips. Her lips were red and slightly curled up as if she was waiting for a kiss. Qin Anlin was not a good man or woman. Now the girl in front of him was the girl he liked. Moreover, he was angry with her. This kind of anger was enough to burn a man's rationality. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and abruptly pulled her into his arms. When he sensed that she was trying to escape, he quickly grabbed one of her hands and forcefully pressed it down, and then pressed her against the wall. Pei Chi-Chi's head smashed into the wall with a loud thud, leaving her dazed. Qin Anlin's hot lips kissed her little mouth without a care. At the same time, he held both her little arms and raised them above her head, not giving her a chance to escape. When he kissed her, he sighed in satisfaction. However, it was still rough. His hot, thin lips touched her velvety little mouth. That feeling was like going to heaven. He became hurried and his breathing was also messy, as if he was unable to control himself like the young man in green. Not enough. Not enough. He wanted more. His body leaned forward even more, and he held both of her hands with one hand. He freed his other hand to pinch her sharp and beautiful chin and exerted a little force. Chapter 9:28. Pei Chi-Chi's head was dizzy, but she bit him instinctively. That strength was almost enough to bite him in half. Qin Anlin retreated, his gaze locked on her little face. Pei Chi-Chi was the same. Her breathing was messy, and her chest was heaving up and down violently from the struggle just now. Her hair hung hopelessly in a bun, looking indescribably seductive. Qin Anlin's heart was hard and soft at the same time. Although he had retreated, he did not let her go. He said in a low voice, "Why did you struggle? Pei Chi, you only love him, don't you? There was a kind of Pei Liang in his tone. At such a night, anyone who heard it would feel sad. Pei Chi did not soften at all. She raised her head and said firmly, yes. Qin Anlin laughed. His body leaned forward, and his face was buried in her neck. His warm breath blew on her soft and cool skin, causing her to tremble slightly. His lips were right next to her ear, and he said in a low voice, Pei Chi, do you believe that Tang Yu will still want you if I take you right here and now? Her body froze. After a long time, she laughed softly. Qin Anlin, if you think you're a beast, you can do it, but I'll call for help. A large palm suddenly covered her little mouth, forcefully covering it. She struggled for a long time, but couldn't say a single word. Pei Chi, no one will come even if you scream to death. His gaze was a little sinister, and then he lowered his head and bit her thin shoulder forcefully. Pain, humiliation, and the smell of blood permeated the whole space. Pei Chi bit her lip hard, and she stared at the man in front of her. She bent her knee and pushed him. Qin Anlin let out a muffled groan. His whole body was pressed against her, and he did not move for a long time. Pei Chi was panting, and her body was pressed against him so she could not move anymore. At this moment, it was not that she was not afraid, but she was afraid of angering him further. It was not that she did not care. After a long time, Qin Anlin finally looked up. His gaze was complicated and unfathomable, and he stared at her for a long time. Pei Chi's body trembled slightly. His gaze first fell on her little face, then on her lips, her little neck, and her full and petite body. His gaze seemed to be on fire, as if he was patrolling and leaving his mark on her fair skin. Pei Chi shifted uneasily, and her voice was tense. What you want? Qin Anlin's voice was so low and hoarse that it sounded like sand scraping against paper. He asked the same question as before. You only love him, don't you? Yes, Pei Chi said resolutely. Qin Anlin, love is for a lifetime. Once I've loved him, I won't change it, unless he doesn't love me anymore. She did not want to give Qin Anlin hopeless hope, and she did not want to attract any trouble for herself. Qin Anlin suddenly let go of her and took 2 steps back. His gaze became cold, as if he was looking at a stranger. His thin lips even showed a hint of coldness. Pei Chi, don't let me see you again. It turned out that in the end, he also wanted to take what he wanted. It turned out that she was not willing to give him what he wanted. This was such a disappointment. He had long decided not to touch love, but now he had trapped himself in it. Chapter 9:29. Pei Chi leaned against the wall. Her hands and feet were weak. She was really frightened. She pulled up her clothes with difficulty, pursed her lips, and walked forward step by step. Qin Anlin was behind her and asked in a gloomy voice, Pei Chi, your love is so firm and unwavering for a lifetime. What about Lin Jinrong? Pei Chi stood in the circle of warm halo. Hearing his words, she was in a trance for a moment. After a long time, she turned around and looked into Qin Anlin's eyes. She said softly, Jinrong is my best memory. Qin Anlin sneered. What about me? Is it a nightmare? She pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Qin Anlin's expression became more gloomy. Pei Chi, go away. The farther the better. Don't ever appear in front of me, or I don't know what I'll do. Pei Chi's eyes were filled with tears. She stared at him for a long time and suddenly picked up the hem of her dress and ran out. That touch of blue hurt Qin Anlin's eyes. She refused to belong to him after all. She would rather wait for Tang Yu forever. A gloomy female voice sounded beside him. Anlin, now do you know the feeling of heartache? Qin Anlin recognized that it was Shun Lian's voice. He didn't turn around but smiled faintly. I thought you had left. Why? Are you still reluctant to leave? Do you think there will be a miracle? Beside Shun Lian was Meng Qingqing, who hadn't appeared for a long time. She stood quietly beside Shun Lian without any expression. Qin Anlin turned around slowly. His eyes swept over Meng Qingqing's face and finally fell on Shun Lian's face. Shun Lian's face was almost distorted. The muscles on her cheeks were trembling and looked a little stiff. After a long time, she raised her chin. Anlin, I think we should join forces. Join forces? What should I do? To suppress Pei Chi? Qin Anlin chuckled, but his eyes were cold. Shinlian, when did you become so narrow-minded? Man is just a brand under Jin Taiha, just the tip of the iceberg. Are you going to fight against Pei Chi, vent your hatred, and ignore the interests of the whole group for your personal feelings? Shinlian sneered. What am I afraid of? Other than Sheng Yuan, Jin Taiha is the best in the industry. Qin Anlin's lips curled into a mocking smile. Looks like jealousy has blinded your eyes. Do you know Bui Corporation? If you haven't heard of it, go back and Baidu it. Shinlian didn't think so. Qin Anlin, are you still reluctant to let her go? If we work together, Pei Chi will have nowhere to go. She will be yours. Qin Anlin lowered his eyebrows, stroked his exquisite cufflinks, and chuckled. Shinlian, I have to say that your IQ has regressed by 20 years. After that, he turned around and left without looking back. Shinlian looked at his back, and the expression on her face became even more gloomy. Qin Anlin still couldn't bear to let that bitch go. He was still thinking about her. Wasn't liking someone the same as desperately trying to possess them? When she asked Meng Qingqing didn't say anything and just stood there quietly. Shinlian turned around and looked at his handsome face. She had always known that he was good-looking and capable. He had been with her for so long, but he had never smiled. She knew that he liked Tang Xian. Chapter 930. Meng Qingqiang was still expressionless. Shinlian raised her eyebrows as she lost control of her emotions. She even believed herself. Without Pei Chi, I would have donated my bone marrow to Tang Xian. That way, Tang Xian wouldn't have died. I like her very much. Tang Xian is also my little sister. Qingqing, it's all because of Pei Chi. She leaned against Meng Qingqiang and even wanted to kiss his chin. Meng Qingqing pushed her away and said coldly, President Shen, you're drunk? Shinlian was stunned, and her eyes were filled with hurt. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Because her feet were fake. She sneered, Meng Qingqing, even you can't get over it, can you? What's there to get over a dead person? She was almost hysterical. Meng Qingqing ignored her and turned to leave. They're leaving one by one. You guys can go. Shinlian's eyes were filled with sadness. Go. Go far away. One day, I'll make you regret it. Pei Chi lifted the hem of her dress and ran towards the entrance of the resort. She had received a call from Xiao Mei, who said that she was waiting for her at the entrance. Once she got out, she saw a familiar car. It was the one that she and Oldkin came in. Without thinking, she opened the door and got in. However, the moment she sat in the car, she was pulled into the warm embrace of a man. Then, she heard a deep voice, Old Zhao, drive. Old Zhao got the order and started the car slowly. In the back seat, Pei Chi was lying in Tang Yu's arms. She was confused for a long time. Didn't he go to America? Why was he back? I just got off the plane and came here. Tang Yu's voice was indifferent as he guessed her question. Pei Chi seemed to be in a dream. She replied with an "oh" and then looked up and asked, Where are we going? Tang Yu did not reply, as he could smell the faint scent of alcohol on her. He frowned. You drank? Originally, he was counting on Old Kansas obviously. Old Can, who was in love, was very unreliable. He almost lost Pei Chi. Look at him now. He had picked up a little drunk cat. Pei Chi was already mostly awake. At this time, in his arms, that warm breath, and that noble face made her a little dizzy. She bit her lips and couldn't say a word for a long time. Tang Yu hugged her and pressed one hand on her shoulder to stop her from moving. At the same time, he bent down slightly. His tall and slightly cool nose touched her little neck and then moved to her shoulder. He reached out, and a small light above the back seat lit up. He also saw the wound on her shoulder. It was a bite mark, and judging from the bite mark, it was obviously done by a man. Pei Chi looked uneasy. She bit her lips and looked at him. Who bit you? Tang Yu's voice was low and slow. His slender fingers gently stroked the wound. She didn't dare to lie and said honestly, Qin Anlin. Afraid that he would misunderstand, she quickly added, nothing happened. You've bitten me to this extent, and you're telling me nothing happened. Huh. He straightened her up, and she sat in his arms in a shameful manner. Pei Chi was afraid that he would be angry, but after sitting in his arms like this, she was even more afraid that he would be angry. Tang Yu's voice was very low and husky. Chi, what do you think we should do? She let out an ah and was kissed by him. Tang Yu smelled the faint smell of smoke again, and his whole body froze. He believed that Chi wouldn't betray him and wouldn't like Qin Anlin. However, he was still angry because she had been molested by Qin Anlin. He wasn't angry at her, but at himself. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.